From the absolute worst golf circumstances to brilliant golf shots under immense pressure. These are the most mind-blowing moments in golf at the US Open. And first we start with this crazy one, which brings us to Dustin Johnson's tailor-made US Open promo, one that nearly ended in disaster. Marketing campaigns are all about taking risks, but sometimes those risks come a little too close to disaster. In 2015, TaylorMade came up with what seemed like a brilliant promotional idea. They partnered with PGA Tour Superstore and announced a special offer. Anyone who bought a new TaylorMade driver would get a full refund if Dustin Johnson won the US Open at Chambers Bay. Now, this type of deal is usually a safe bet. Winning a major championship isn't exactly easy, even for someone as talented as Johnson. But as the tournament progressed, TaylorMade's marketing team must have started sweating because Johnson was playing lights out. He was right there at the top of the leaderboard heading into the final round. And then came the 18th hole, one of the most painful moments of Johnson's career. He had a chance to win outright with an eagle putt from 12 feet. The putt? It slid just past the hole. No big deal, right? He still had a 4-footer for birdie to force a playoff with Jordan Spieth. But then, the unthinkable happened. He missed. Just like that, Johnson went from potential US Open champion to runner-up, and Jordan Spieth walked away with his second consecutive major win. For TaylorMade, it was a miracle escape by mere inches. Had Dustin Johnson sunk either of those putts, the company would have been on the hook for millions in refunds, turning a bold promotion into a financial nightmare. But luckily for them, fate had other plans. Instead of disaster, they walked away with the best possible outcome. Massive publicity, zero payout. The next one takes us way back to Sam Snead in 1947. The US Open was Snead's white whale, the one trophy that always eluded him, despite being one of the greatest golfers ever. We're talking about Slammin' Sammy here, a man who would go on to win a record 82 PGA Tour events, 7 majors, and was famous for having the most beautiful swing in golf history. But the US Open, that tournament seemed to have a personal vendetta against him. The 1947 Heartbreak at St. Louis Country Club was the cruelest of them all. Snead was in a playoff with Lou Worsham. He faces a mere 2.5-footer to extend the playoff. A putt so short that Snead could probably have made it with his eyes closed on any other day. But this was the US Open, and these weren't just any 2.5 feet. They were the longest 30 inches in golf history. The ball slid past the hole, and with it went another chance at the trophy he coveted most. Back in 1939, he failed too. It's like the US Open had some kind of curse on Slammin' Sammy. 4 times he finished second, but never got to lift that trophy. The tournament that should have been his masterpiece became his nemesis. Coming in next, we've got Danny Lee at the 2020 US Open. Now, we've all had bad days on the green, but Danny Lee? He took it to a whole new level. Here's the situation. He's on the 18th hole at Winged Foot, already one of the toughest courses in existence, and he's got a 4-foot putt. Easy until it's not. He missed the first putt. Okay, no big deal. Misses the second. Starting to get concerning. Third putt? Nope. Fourth? Still no. Fifth? Come on, Danny. By the 6th putt, it's like watching a horror movie where the victim keeps running up the stairs instead of out the front door. But here's where it gets really wild. After finally getting the ball in the hole, and remember, this started from 4 feet away, Lee turns into the Incredible Hulk. He grabs his putter, and I swear this thing must have personally insulted his entire family because he starts slamming it into his bag like he's trying to drive it through to China. Storms off the green, and then, get this, withdraws from the tournament, citing a wrist injury. Yeah, I wonder how that wrist got injured. Maybe from trying to murder your putter? All right, check this one out. So, winning the US Open is one thing. Breaking records while doing it? That's a whole different level of greatness. And in 2017, Justin Thomas did just that, firing a historic 63 at Erin Hills, a score that had golf fans buzzing. But Johnny Miller, he wasn't buzzing, he was comparing. Instead of celebrating Thomas's achievement, Miller brushed it aside with one of the most backhanded compliments in golf history. It's great, but it's not quite Oakmont. Translation? Nice try, kid, but it's not as good as what I did. Miller was referring to his own legendary 63 at Oakmont in 1973, a course widely considered one of the hardest in US Open history. And rather than letting Thomas enjoy his moment, Miller made sure to remind everyone that his record was just a little better. Not exactly the warmest congratulations. Instead of lifting Thomas up, Miller made it all about himself, turning one of the greatest rounds in US Open history into a personal victory lap. And then this happened. Arnold Palmer, 1966 US Open at the Olympic Club in San Francisco. This wasn't just a collapse. This was a complete and utter implosion that still echoes through golf history. Palmer, the king himself, at the height of his powers, with his army of fans following his every move, was on the verge of something special. Leading by 9 shots in the final round, Arnie was about to claim his second US Open title and his 8th major championship overall. But this is where Palmer's legendary aggressive style, the very thing that made him the people's champion, became his undoing. Instead of playing it safe, protecting his massive lead, Arnie kept attacking flags like he was trying to shoot 59. It was classic Palmer, go for broke, give the fans a show. Billy Casper, meanwhile, played with the precision of a surgeon, methodically dissecting the course while Palmer self-destructed. And then it happened. It was so painful to watch. At the par 5 13th, a bogey started to chip away at his cushion. Then came the par 4 15th, where a careless 3-putt bogey brought Casper even closer. By the 16th, a disastrous double bogey wiped out the last of his lead, and Casper had caught him. Palmer's 9-shot advantage was gone. The next day's 18-hole playoff wasn't even close. Casper, steady as ever, won by 4 shots, claiming his second US Open title. For Palmer, this wasn't just a loss, it was a turning point. He would never win another major championship, and the collapse became a shadow that followed him for the rest of his life. Here we are at the next, and Jon Rahm's fiery exchange with a fan. Golf fans can be passionate, sometimes too passionate, and at the 2023 US Open at Los Angeles Country Club, one fan learned the hard way that pushing Jon Rahm's buttons was a bad idea. Rahm was already fighting an uphill battle. The thick rough had turned the course into a nightmare, and every shot felt like a struggle. As he lined up for yet another brutally difficult attempt, the last thing he needed was a distraction. But then, it happened. A voice from the crowd cut through the tense silence, heckling him right before his shot. A cheap attempt to get in his head. Now, most golfers would try to ignore it, but Rahm isn't most golfers. The guy has fire in his veins, and he wasn't about to let some random spectator mess with his concentration. After hearing the heckler's comments, Rahm turned toward the fan and snapped, "Just shut up! Jesus Christ!" It was raw, unfiltered, and totally human. You could see the frustration on his face. He was battling not just the course, but also the constant noise from the crowd. The fan? Well, let's just say he didn't have much to say after that. Security kept a close eye on him, and Rahm went back to trying to grind out a solid round. Golf has long been considered a quiet, respectful sport, but as fan culture evolves, moments like this are becoming more common. And honestly, seeing a player like Rahm speak his mind instead of just brushing it off made for one of the most relatable moments of the tournament. All right, here's another one. The 1950 US Open at Marion Golf Club was already a battlefield of perseverance and drama. Ben Hogan, fresh off a near-fatal car accident just 16 months earlier, was vying for one of the most incredible comebacks in sports history. The stakes couldn't have been higher as Hogan, Lloyd Mangrum, and George Fazio squared off in an 18-hole playoff to decide the champion. By the time the trio reached the 16th green, tensions were at a breaking point. Mangrum was focused on keeping pace with Hogan. He marked his ball to let Fazio putt, but as he prepared to line up his own shot, something totally unexpected happened. A bug landed on his ball. Nothing strange, right? Well, what came next was as subtle as it was devastating. Mangrum remarked his ball and lifted it to blow off the insect, a seemingly harmless act in the heat of the moment. But under the strict rules of the time, marking and lifting your ball on the green was only allowed if it interfered with another player's line. The penalty? 2 strokes. The crowd gasped as word spread of the infraction. Mangrum, unaware at first, holed his putt thinking he had saved par. But the ruling hit like a thunderclap, derailing his chances at victory. Hogan, who was already playing some of the most inspired golf of his life, suddenly found himself with an even clearer path to the title, which he eventually won. Next up, at the 2015 US Open, 21-year-old Jordan Spieth stood on the 18th fairway at Chambers Bay with everything on the line. Just 1 hole earlier, he had doubled the 17th. A disaster that came out of nowhere. His tee shot missed the fairway, his approach rolled off the back, and then he 3-putted from the fringe. Just like that, a one-shot lead turned into a tie at the top. It was a gut punch at the worst possible time. And now, with a chance to make history, Spieth needed something special. He had 284 yards to the hole. The green was narrow, the pressure insane, and he pulled out a 3-wood. And what happened next was absolutely jaw-dropping. Spieth launched it high, talking to his ball the entire way. Hit it wind, any wind up there, hit it a little bit, begging for just the right help from the skies. The shot came off dead straight, landed perfectly on a slope near the back edge of the green, kicked left, and began tracking straight toward the pin. It stopped just past the flag, leaving a simple 2-putt for birdie. A calm, championship-level answer to the chaos of the hole before. And when Dustin Johnson missed his short birdie putt minutes later, Spieth's birdie on 18 proved to be the difference. All right, on to the next one. This one broke hearts in real time, while the camera was still rolling. The year was 1992. The US Open at Pebble Beach had turned into a windstorm. Gusts were topping 40 miles per hour, the greens were rock hard, and balls were flying in every direction, except the right one. Colin Montgomery had already posted an even par finish. In those conditions, that looked unbeatable. Even Jack Nicklaus, watching from the booth, started offering congrats. Then came Tom Kite. On the iconic 7th hole, a 106-yard par 3 that was playing like 206, Kite missed the green long and left. No surprise, only one player from the last 15 groups had even found the green. From that lie in that wind, most would have just hoped to get it anywhere near the hole. But Kite saw something. He gave the pitch a nudge, the wind caught it, and it broke right into the cup. Montgomery watched from the TV booth, hands on his head, stunned. That chip didn't just save Kite, it flipped the whole momentum of the final round. He still had work to do, but that one shot was the statement, the turning point, the proof that he wasn't just surviving the chaos, he was beating it. Now this next one, it all came down to one swing, from one of the worst spots on the course. Matt Fitzpatrick was clinging to a one-shot lead on the 72nd hole of the 2022 US Open at the Country Club. He'd been rock solid all week, but his drive on 18 found trouble. A fairway bunker on the left. It was a nightmare lie. Ball slightly above his feet, no margin for error, and staring straight into the pressure of winning his first major. But Fitzpatrick went for it. With a full swing and a 9-iron in hand, he launched a dart that cut through the tension and dropped just 18 feet from the pin. No wild celebration, no fist pump. Just a deep breath and the quiet confidence of a player who had just taken control of the tournament. He 2-putted for par and won his first major, thanks to a shot that showed nerves of steel when it mattered most. Moving on to the next one. It looked like Larry Nelson was running out of magic. He had barely made the cut at the 1983 US Open, but somehow clawed his way into contention with 2 incredible rounds. Now, with just a few holes left at Oakmont, he was tied for the lead, right in the thick of it. But Oakmont isn't the kind of place where you coast to victory. You have to earn it. And on the 16th hole, a tough par 3, Nelson faced one of the most intimidating putts you'll ever see. 60 feet. Uphill at first, then breaking hard downhill. The kind of putt you'd just hope to cozy up close. But Nelson gave it a smooth roll. The ball climbed the ridge, caught the right line, and just kept tracking. And then it dropped. A 60-foot birdie in the final round on one of the fastest greens in major championship golf. That putt gave Nelson the outright lead, and he never looked back. It was the moment that turned a steady charge into a legendary win. Here's another one. Most players, when faced with thick rough, a tree in their line, and a green perched high on a ridge, would do the sensible thing. Punch out, take their medicine, and hope to save par the hard way. But Tiger Woods wasn't most players, and the 2000 US Open at Pebble Beach wasn't about playing it safe. It was the 6th hole, long, uphill, and brutal. After a wayward drive, Tiger found his ball buried in 4 inches of thick rough, 205 yards from the flag. In front of him stood a towering tree with the green sitting far above on a steep, elevated plateau. Just getting the ball back in play would have been impressive. Instead, Tiger reached for a 7-iron, not to lay up, but to go for it. He launched the ball up and over the tree, over the rise, and somehow, against every odd in the book, it landed on the green and held. The NBC announcers were stunned. Roger Maltby summed it up perfectly. It's just not a fair fight. Because in that moment, It wasn't. Tiger wasn't battling the field. He was on a completely different level. Moving on to this one. And let me tell you, nobody saw this coming. Not even him. The year was 1990, and Hale Irwin was quietly grinding his way through the final round at Medina. At 45 years old, he wasn't exactly the center of attention. It had been over a decade since his last major win, and most figured his best days were behind him. But on Sunday afternoon, he found himself with a chance. One last hole. One long putt. Irwin stood over a 45-footer on the 18th green. Uphill, winding, with everything on the line. It looked more like a lag putt situation than a game changer. But he hit it perfectly. The crowd leaned in as the ball made its way up the slope, took the break, and disappeared into the cup. The place erupted. Irwin exploded with a fist pump, slapped hands with a fan, and broke into a full-on jog off the green, grinning like a kid. That putt forced a playoff, and the next day, Irwin finished the job. He became the oldest U.S. Open winner in history, thanks to a putt that started as a prayer and ended as a moment for the ages. All right, watch this one. This wasn't just a highlight. It was a thunderclap in the middle of a major. Scottie Scheffler was right in the thick of it during the third round of the 2022 U.S. Open at the Country Club in Brookline. He'd been playing steady, patient golf, keeping himself in the hunt without making too much noise. But then came the par 5 8th. After a solid drive and a smart layup, Scheffler stood over his third shot from 102 yards out. It's a distance every pro loves. But the pressure? That's what separates the contenders from the champions. Scheffler gave it one smooth swing. The ball soared high, landed softly on the front of the green, and then the crowd started leaning forward. It kept rolling, breaking slightly left, and then disappeared right into the cup. Eagle. Boom. The crowd exploded. The leaderboard flipped. And just like that, Scheffler had taken the outright lead at the U.S. Open. What made the moment even bigger was what it meant. A surge of momentum in one of the tightest majors in recent memory. Fitzpatrick, Zalatoris, and Scheffler were all trading blows. But this eagle, it was a haymaker. Next one, picture this. Final hole of the U.S. Open tied for the lead, pressure at absolute maximum. Bryson DeChambeau stood on the 18th tee at Pinehurst number 2, knowing a par might be the difference between heartbreak and history. He pulled driver, and the ball veered left, landing near one of the grandstands just under a tree. It left him with a brutally tough lie and a not ideal angle into the green. His second shot? Aggressive. He went for it, but couldn't quite pull it off. The ball landed in the greenside bunker, 54 yards from the flag. And that's when the magic happened. Bryson climbed in, stared down a 54-yard shot, one of the most uncomfortable distances in golf, and just went for it. The ball soared out of the sand, landed softly, and started rolling. It stopped just 4 feet from the hole. He made the putt, and the crowd exploded. And just like that, Bryson DeChambeau was a 2-time U.S. Open champion. Thanks to one of the most perfectly timed bunker shots in major championship history. Coming in next is one of the most spine-tingling putts in U.S. Open history. A moment of pure Tiger Woods magic under maximum pressure. It was 2008 at Torrey Pines, Sunday afternoon. Tiger was limping on a fractured leg, held together by adrenaline, painkillers, and pure willpower. He had one hole left and one chance left. He had to birdie the 18th to force a playoff with Rocco Mediate. His tee shot found the fairway. His approach landed short, but a brilliant chip gave him a chance. A downhill 12-foot putt with everything on the line. It wasn't just a must-make, it was the kind of putt that defines legacies. Tiger took a breath, rolled it pure, and when it dropped, Torrey Pines exploded. He threw his arms into the air like a matador. Wounded, defiant, iconic. That putt didn't just force a playoff. It capped off one of the gutsiest performances the sport has ever seen, and set the stage for Tiger's final major win of his prime. Check this one out. One swing, one shot, and one moment that sealed a championship. The year was 1976, and the U.S. Open had come to the Atlanta Athletic Club for the very first time. It was hot, it was tense, and it all came down to the 18th hole. Jerry Pate, just 22 years old, had climbed into the lead for the first time all day. One shot clear of his playing partner, John Mahaffey. Mahaffey blinked first. His approach shot splashed into the pond guarding the green. But Jerry? He was in the right rough, 190 yards out with the flag tucked all the way to the back left. The smart play was to bail out right, take par, and hope for the best. But that's not what he did. He pulled 5-iron, took a deep breath, and flushed it. The ball flew high, cut through the air, and landed like it had eyes. 2 feet from the cup. That single shot sealed the deal. A tap-in birdie, a one-shot win. And just like that, Jerry Pate became a major champion with one of the coldest finishers in US Open history. All right, on to the next one. Let's talk about a shot that made the brutal Oakmont look easy, at least for one swing. It was the first round of the 2016 US Open, and 21-year-old Matt Fitzpatrick had just missed the green on the par 4 second. His ball rolled into a nasty little greenside bunker. Deep, awkward, and not exactly the place you expect to create a highlight. A spot where most players would be content to get up and down for par. But Fitzpatrick had other plans. He took his stance, executed a precise swing, and watched as the ball sailed out of the sand and dropped straight into the cup. No bounce, just a clean dunk. Bunker to bucket. No need to read the green. No need to worry about the speed. Just a cold-blooded hole-out that turned a stressful par into a walk-off birdie. At Oakmont of all places, that's something you don't forget. Then came this. The exact moment Rory McIlroy turned dominance into a full-blown takeover. It was Friday at the 2011 US Open, and Rory was already off to a hot start. But what happened on the 8th hole made everyone watching sit up a little straighter. He just striped a drive down the fairway. Perfect position on the short par 4. With a wedge in hand and a clear look at the pin, this looked like a simple birdie setup. Stick it close, tap it in, keep the momentum going. But Rory had something else in mind. He launched his approach sky high. It flew past the flag, landed softly, and then started to spin. Slowly, deliberately, rolling back toward the cup. And then it disappeared. An eagle. Out of nowhere, the kind of shot that doesn't just change around. It announces your arrival. From that moment on, the tournament was over. Rory never looked back. He finished the week at 16 under par, shattering the US Open scoring record and putting on one of the most dominant displays the game has ever seen. Coming into the next one. And let me tell you, this one had a crazy ending. Tom Watson stood over his ball just off the green at the par 3 17th at Pebble Beach, tied with Jack Nicklaus in the final round of the 1982 US Open. The pressure? Immense. The lie? Awkward. Most players would have been thinking damage control, just get it close, tap in for par, move on. But not Watson. He looked at his caddy and said, "I'm going to sink it." And then he did. The ball popped out perfectly, landed on the fringe, took one soft hop, and broke right into the hole. Watson exploded with energy, sprinting up the hill, pumping his fist in the air like he'd just won the whole thing. And in a way, he had. Jack Nicklaus, watching from the clubhouse, knew what that meant. Watson would go on to birdie the 18th too, locking up his only US Open title, thanks to one of the craziest chip-ins in major championship history. Now another moment. And trust me, you've never seen geometry like this on a golf course. It was the final hole of the 2000 US Open at Pebble Beach. Tiger Woods was already in full domination mode, steamrolling the field like it wasn't even fair. But just when you thought he might start playing it safe, he pulled off one of the most ridiculous shots you'll ever see. His tee shot on the par 5 18th landed on the right side of the fairway. Not bad, until you saw the tree. A giant cypress, right in his line. Most players would have punched out or taken the safe route down the fairway. But Tiger? He pulled 3 wood and stared down a shot that looked impossible. With the Pacific Ocean stretching out to his left, he aimed out over open water and let it rip. And then came the swing. He launched it high, cut it hard, and somehow the ball bent back around the tree like it had a steering wheel. It soared over the cliffs, curved back onto the green, and rolled to a perfect spot. Even the commentators couldn't believe it. It looked like a video game glitch. But nope, just Tiger being Tiger. A few moments later, he tapped in for birdie and closed out the most dominant US Open win in history by 15 shots. But it's that second shot, carved through wind and over water, that still makes jaws drop to this day. Can you believe this? It was finally Dustin Johnson's time. After years of crushing defeats and major heartbreak, he arrived at the final hole of the 2016 US Open at Oakmont with everything on the line. He had a 2-shot lead, but nothing was guaranteed. Earlier in the round, the USGA told him he might be assessed a penalty. They just weren't sure yet. So Johnson played the rest of the round without knowing his actual score. Now standing on the 18th tee, he needed to close it out. No drama, no questions. He smashed his drive down the middle, leaving himself 190 yards to the pin. And then, with a 6-iron in hand, he hit the shot. A laser that pierced through the air, landed soft, and settled just 3 feet from the flag. It was cold, it was clinical, it was the shot that slammed the door. He made the birdie, took the trophy, and finally became a major champion. And penalty or not, there was no doubt who earned it. Watch this one. This shot came from one of the most unforgiving clubs in golf, at one of the most pressure-packed moments of Jack Nicklaus's career. The year was 1972. Pebble Beach was brutal, cold, windy, and relentless. And Jack Nicklaus was just 2 holes away from victory. Standing on the tee of the 17th hole, a 208-yard par 3 staring straight into the wind. But this wasn't a hole you just survived. Not in those conditions. He needed something special. So he reached for the hardest club in the bag, the 1-iron. And let's be honest, when's the last time you saw anyone on tour using that thing? It was a bold choice, especially with that wind, but Nicklaus made it look easy. He launched it high into the breeze, held the line, and watched as the ball pierced through the gusts, dropped onto the green, and slammed straight into the flagstick. It stopped just inches from the hole. That one swing didn't just quiet the nerves, it sealed the championship. A perfect shot at the perfect time from one of the greatest to ever play the game. But it gets better. And this one came from a 21-year-old amateur who played like he owned the place. Before Jon Rahm was a major champion, before he was one of the most feared players in the world, he was just a rising star trying to prove he belonged. And at the 2016 US Open at Oakmont, he didn't just belong, he lit the place up. It was the 3rd round. Rahm stepped up to the par 5 12th hole and laid up with his second shot, leaving himself 111 yards to the pin. Nothing flashy, just smart golf. But what came next? That was pure magic. He gave his wedge a smooth swing. The ball climbed into the air, landed a few feet past the flag, and then zipped backward, spinning straight into the hole. Eagle! The crowd went wild. And Rahm? He just calmly walked up and took it all in. It was a glimpse of what was coming. He would go on to finish as low amateur that week. But that shot? That shot looked like something out of a primetime highlight reel. And it came from a kid who was just getting started. Up to the next one. This shot didn't just win the US Open, it shut the door, with style. It was 1995 at Shinnecock Hills. Corey Pavin wasn't the biggest name in the field, and he definitely wasn't the biggest hitter. But on Sunday afternoon, with everything on the line, he stood on the 18th fairway with a 1-shot lead, needing just one more big moment to close the deal. And then came the shot. He had 228 yards to the flag. The wind was up, nerves were high, and instead of playing it safe, Pavin pulled his 4-wood. Not a club you see every day from the fairway, especially not on the 72nd hole of the US Open. But he made it count. He striped it. The ball soared through the air and landed just a few feet from the cup. You could hear the crowd explode before it even stopped rolling. That one swing sealed it. A tap-in par, a major championship, and one of the gutsiest clutch shots you'll ever see under pressure. Corey Pavin didn't overpower Shinnecock. He outplayed it. And that 4-wood, straight into the history books. And now we're counting down from number 20. Imagine playing the biggest round of your life and not even knowing what your score is. The 2016 US Open at Oakmont was already brutal. Fast greens, deep rough, major pressure. But for Dustin Johnson, things got weird on the 5th green. He was standing over a par putt when his ball moved, just barely. Johnson backed off, called in a rules official, and was told no penalty, play on. So he did. He kept grinding, kept building a lead. And then, out of nowhere, on the 12th tee, officials pulled him aside. They told him they were still reviewing the incident on 5th. Translation, he might get a 1-stroke penalty, or he might not, while he was still playing. Johnson didn't know if he was tied, ahead, or behind. He just had to keep playing and hope. Later, the USGA explained their decision. Under Rule 18-2, a player can be penalized if their actions are deemed to have caused the ball to move, even if unintentionally. In Johnson's case, they said it was more likely than not that grounding his putter near the ball had caused the movement. He hadn't addressed it. He didn't touch it. But based on timing and proximity, they gave him the penalty anyway. In the end, he was assessed the stroke, but still won by 3. But the damage was done. not to his scorecard, but to the USGA's credibility. Next up, number 19. During the second round of the 2000 US Open at Pebble Beach, one of the most dominant performances in golf history, Tiger Woods came dangerously close to disqualification due to a forgotten detail and a risky moment. The night before, Tiger had taken several balls out of his bag to practice putting in his hotel room. He forgot to put them back. That meant he started the round with fewer balls than usual. As the round progressed, the supply was now critically low. Still unaware of how few he had, Tiger stepped onto the 18th tee box, a brutal par 5 with water down the left side. He pulled his tee shot into the ocean, losing the second-to-last ball he had in the bag. That's when he casually turned to his caddy, Steve Williams, and asked for another ball. Steve gave him the last ball in the bag and quietly suggested he take an iron off the tee, just to play it safe. But Tiger looked at him and said, "Why would I hit an iron if I'm playing this well?" Then he stepped up with driver again. Steve was panicking inside but knew better than to rattle Tiger in the moment. Years later, Steve said, "I have never, ever been that nervous. I am standing there with my backside trembling. My butt cheeks were absolutely clamoring." Had Tiger lost that last ball, he would have had no legal way to finish the hole, and under the rules, he'd be disqualified from the tournament. But of course, Tiger being Tiger, he safely found the fairway with his second drive and went on to complete the round. He'd not only avoid disaster, he'd go on to win the tournament by a jaw-dropping 15 shots, the largest margin of victory in major championship history. At number 18, one of the most chaotic meltdowns the US Open has ever seen. The 1999 US Open at Pinehurst was already a nightmare for most players. Lightning-fast greens, wicked pin placements, and barely a breath of forgiveness anywhere. But no one cracked quite like John Daly. On the par 4 8th hole, Daly found himself in trouble. He was behind the green, facing a nearly impossible uphill putt. He gave it a go and watched the ball roll right back to his feet. Tried again, same result. And then he snapped. As the ball rolled back a third time, Daly walked right up to it and smacked it while it was still moving. A clear rules violation and an automatic 2-stroke penalty. He carded an 11 on the hole. But that wasn't the end of it. After the round, Daly let it rip, blasting the course setup, the USGA, and even saying he no longer considered the US Open a real major. He finished the tournament 29 over par, dead last among those who made the cut. But that moment on the 8th hole, that wasn't just frustration, it was full-on rebellion, and one of the most unforgettable outbursts in US Open history. Number 17 starts with a putt and ends with a tragedy no one saw coming. The 1999 US Open at Pinehurst had already turned into a battle for the ages. Two men trading punches on one of the toughest tracks in golf. On one side, the flashy veteran, Payne Stewart. On the other, a young Phil Mickelson, still chasing his first major. As they reached the 18th hole, it was dead even. The pressure? Unbelievable. Stewart's tee shot found the fairway. His approach left him with 18 feet to save par. If he missed, there'd be a playoff. If he made it, he'd win his second US Open. The crowd held their breath. The putt dropped, dead center, and Stewart let out one of the most iconic fist pumps the game has ever seen. Leg straight, arm high, pure emotion. He'd done it. He'd held off Phil. He was the US Open champion once again. But what no one knew was how quickly it would all be taken away. Just 4 months later, Payne Stewart died in a tragic plane crash. He was 42. That putt, that moment, it became something bigger than golf. It became the image the world would remember him by. Arms raised, fearless, and full of life. Coming in at number 16. And let me tell you, you won't believe this one. So here's this UPS driver who plays the round of his life, only to get disqualified by a hot dog. Nick Barrett wasn't your typical name on the tee sheet. No endorsements, no private jets, just a 31-year-old UPS driver from Maryland. And a dream. He had already beaten the odds just to get here, making it through local qualifying with a bogey-free 68. Now, in the final stage at Woodmont Country Club, he was holding his own, shooting a solid 73 in round 1. The US Open at Oakmont was suddenly within reach. And then he went to lunch. While grabbing a hot dog, Nick stood up, patted his back pocket, and froze. His scorecard was still in there. Unsigned, unsubmitted. He sprinted back to the scoring tent, but it was too late. The rules were clear. No signature, no score. Disqualified. A dream, crushed not by a bad shot, but by a technicality. And Nick? He owned it, called it a total gut punch, said he hoped others could learn from his mistake. One of the most heartbreaking DQs you'll ever see, and proof that in golf, sometimes the smallest things hurt the most. The 2006 US Open at Winged Foot had been a war of survival. Tough course and brutal setup, players hanging on for dear life. But somehow Phil Mickelson found himself on the 18th tee, leading. One hole away from winning the US Open for the first time in his career. He needed just a par, that's it. One clean hole, and the US Open would finally be his. But then came the driver, and the decision that changed everything. Instead of playing it safe, Phil pulled a driver and hooked it way left, into the trees. Still, there was a chance to recover, but his next shot clipped a branch and dropped almost straight down. Now, in full scramble mode, he tried again, and plugged it deep in a greenside bunker. You could feel the meltdown happening in real time. By the time he tapped in, it wasn't for par. It was for double bogey. Just like that, Jeff Ogilvy, who had already finished at +5, was the US Open champion. And Phil? He stood there in disbelief, summing it up in one brutal sentence. "I am such an idiot." It was one of the most shocking collapses in major championship history, on a hole he should have never lost. For number 14, Max Homa tried to do it all himself, until it all slipped away in the final moments. Heading into US Open qualifying, Max Homa was in an unusual spot. He'd just parted ways with his longtime caddy, and instead of bringing in a replacement, he made a bold call. He'd carry his own bag. It was hot, it was a long 36-hole day, and it was all on him. But to everyone's surprise, Max played well. He fought through the grind and posted a 5-under total, good enough for a 5-man playoff for the final qualifying spot at Kinsale Golf Club. And that's where things got painful. A 3-putt on his last hole in regulation had already cost him a guaranteed spot. Then, in the playoff, Cameron Young snatched the last ticket to Oakmont with a birdie on the first hole. Homa still had a shot at getting in as an alternate, but on the second playoff hole, he 4-putted. Just like that, the chance was gone. Turns out carrying your own bag might build character, but it doesn't help you read greens. At number 13, it looked like the tournament had slipped away until one shot flipped everything on its head. Larry Nelson was hanging in there at the 1983 US Open. After barely making the cut, he'd gone on a tear, posting back-to-back rounds that had him suddenly tied for the lead with just a few holes to play. But Oakmont doesn't hand out wins. It demands something special. And on the par 3 16th, Nelson found himself in a nearly hopeless spot, staring down a putt that most players would have gladly taken a 2-putt from. He stepped up and gave the ball a gentle stroke, just enough to get it moving. It rolled up the slope, caught the ridge, and began to break hard to the right. For a moment, it looked like it might come up short, but then it kept rolling, and somehow it dropped. A 60-foot birdie putt on Oakmont's glassy greens in the final round of the US Open. That single shot gave him the lead and changed the outcome of the entire championship. A quiet contender, a miracle moment, and a win that no one saw coming. Which brings us to number 12. It started with a casual lunch and turned into one of the greatest comebacks the US Open has ever seen. The year was 1960, Cherry Hills Country Club. Arnold Palmer, already a fan favorite, trailed by 7 shots heading into the final round of the US Open. While eating lunch before teeing off, Palmer turned to golf writer Bob Drum and asked, "What if I shoot 65? Would that be enough?" Drum didn't even blink. He birdied 6 of his first 7 holes, shot a front 930. The crowd was losing its mind. And as Palmer charged, a 20-year-old amateur named Jack Nicklaus quietly held his ground. He wasn't flashy, but he was fearless, finishing second and showing the world a glimpse of what was coming. But this day belonged to Arnie. Next, number 11. It was all right there. The moment, the title, the redemption. Dustin Johnson had played the final hole of the 2015 US Open to absolute perfection. A blistered drive, a gorgeous approach. He stood over a 12-foot eagle putt on the 18th green at Chambers Bay with a chance to win his first ever major. All he had to do was knock it in, and the nightmare of near misses would finally be over. The crowd held its breath. Johnson lined it up. The putt rolled, but slid just past the edge. Okay, no problem. Tap in for birdie, force a playoff with Jordan Spieth. Still in it. But then, The absolute unthinkable. He stood over a 3-footer, one of those no way he misses this kind of putts, and then he did. The ball lipped out. Just like that, the US Open was over, and he wasn't the winner. The silence said it all. A 2-putt collapse when all he needed was 1. Dustin Johnson went from potential champion to heartbroken runner-up in seconds. It was the kind of moment that sticks to a player's legacy, especially when it's not the first time. For a long time, DJ was the guy who could almost win a major, and on that Sunday in Washington, the curse felt real. Here at number 10, an unknown 17-year-old just dropped one of the most ridiculous stat lines in US Open qualifying history. While the pros were grinding to make it into Oakmont, a high school junior from Georgia named Mason Howell was casually lighting the place on fire. 2 rounds, 36 holes, 18 birdies, 0 bogeys, and a total score of 18 under par. Read that again. This kid made a birdie every other hole, on one of the toughest days in golf, when even PGA Tour players were missing out. He went 63-63 at the Piedmont Driving Club in Atlanta. That's not qualifying, that's domination. By the end of the day, Howell had earned co-medalist honors and a spot in the 2025 US Open at Oakmont. Not bad for someone who probably still has a prom coming up. While big names like Ricky Fowler and Max Homa were heading home empty-handed, this teenager was booking his ticket to the biggest stage in golf. Mason Howell didn't just qualify, he exploded onto the scene. At number 9, this story starts with a collapse and ends with a comeback that shattered the record books. Just 2 months earlier, Rory McIlroy had one hand on the green jacket. He led the Masters after 63 holes, and then completely fell apart. Quadruple bogey, broken swing, crushed confidence. It was the kind of meltdown that could haunt a young player for years. But Rory didn't disappear. He showed up at the 2011 US Open with something to prove, and by the end of the week, no one was questioning him anymore. From the opening tee shot at Congressional, he looked like a man on a mission. A bogey-free 65 on Thursday and a 66 on Friday. He broke the 36-hole scoring record and then kept pushing. But the moment everyone remembers came on Friday at the par 4 8th hole. Rory was in the fairway on the par 4 8th, sitting pretty after a perfect tee shot. It looked like a textbook birdie setup. Short wedge in hand, pin in sight, nothing fancy. The plan? Stick it close, tap in for 3, move on. But then came the swing. The ball flew high and landed just past the hole, and slowly started to trickle back. It rolled back toward the cup, and dropped. An eagle. Out of nowhere. And from that point on, Rory didn't just lead the US Open, he owned it. Finishing at a record-breaking 16 under par to complete one of the most dominant performances the tournament has ever seen. Coming in at number 8, this putt came out of nowhere and changed everything. At the 1990 US Open at Medina, no one was really talking about Hale Irwin. He was 45 years old, hadn't won a major in over a decade, and wasn't exactly on anyone's list of favorites. But somehow, by the time he reached the 18th hole on Sunday, he had a shot, if he could make something happen. He stood over a 45-foot birdie putt, long, uphill with a tricky break. Most guys would have been thrilled just a 2-putt, but Irwin gave it a smooth roll. The crowd got louder as the ball kept tracking, and then it dropped. Dead center. The place went nuts. Irwin celebrated with a huge fist pump, high-fived a fan, and jogged off the green like he just won the whole thing. And in a way, he had, because that putt forced a playoff. The next day, he came back and won it. At 45, Hale Irwin became the oldest US Open champ ever, all because he nailed the one putt no one thought he could make. Now at number 7, this wasn't just a win. It was something golf had never seen before. At first, it looked like any other US Open. Tough course, stacked field, high expectations. But by the end of the week, there was only one name on anyone's mind: Tiger Woods. The year was 2000, the setting, Pebble Beach. And from the very first round, it was clear something special was unfolding. Tiger opened with a 6 under 65, the lowest first round ever recorded in a US Open at Pebble. While everyone else was scrambling to stay close to par, Tiger was making it look like a casual stroll down the fairway. And then came Friday. The winds picked up. Pebble's greens turned nasty. No one broke par except Tiger. He shot a 69. Everyone else? Completely wrecked by the course. By the weekend, he was playing against himself. No one else was even in the conversation. The rough was ankle deep. The greens were like glass. Guys were carding doubles and triples left and right. But Tiger, he didn't make a single double bogey all week. And the final margin? 15 shots. The largest in major championship history, a record that still stands. No one finished under par, except Tiger. He was 12 under. It was so dominant, so absurdly lopsided that pros and fans were left just shaking their heads. He didn't just win a major, he made it feel like no one else even belonged on the same course. Now, here's number 6. It's the final round of the 1994 US Open at Oakmont. Ernie Els is chasing his first major, and the pressure is sky high. Then comes the very first hole, and his tee shot dives straight into the thick, gnarly rough. But that's not the problem. The real issue, his ball ends up right behind a massive TV crane. Obstruction? Yes, but removable? Also yes, because this thing was on wheels and had been moved several times that day. The rule says, if it's movable, you move it. But the on-site rules official Dr. Trey Holland saw it differently. He declared it a temporary, immovable obstruction and gave Els free relief. That drop gave Els a clean lie instead of the jungle he was actually in. He still made bogey, sure, but that better lie likely saved him from something way worse. And here's the kicker. The USGA later admitted it was a mistake. He never should have gotten that relief in the first place, but by then, it was already history. Els made the playoff and won the tournament. But in a tournament where every shot counts, that one drop may have been the difference between winning and watching someone else hoist the trophy. You've made it to our top 5 of the greatest moments in US Open history. And this incident is one of the strangest things Phil Mickelson has ever done on a golf course, and that's saying something. It was the 3rd round of the 2018 US Open at Shinnecock Hills, Mickelson's 48th birthday. But instead of cake and celebration, he gave the golf world chaos. On the par 4 13th, things were already going sideways. He had missed his bogey putt, and the ball started trickling down the slope, looking like it might roll clean off the green. And then, Phil ran after it and hit it while it was still moving. Fans gasped. Commentators were stunned. This wasn't a casual tap. It was a deliberate swing at a ball in motion. He was immediately hit with a 2-stroke penalty, finished the hole with a 10, ended the day with an 81, his worst US Open round ever. But it wasn't just the score that caused the uproar, it was why he did it. After the round, Phil said it was strategic, that he knew the rule and took the penalty on purpose to stop the ball from rolling off the green. The reaction? Mixed. Some called it smart, others called it disrespectful. And suddenly golf wasn't debating scores, it was debating sportsmanship. At number 4, the moment a US Open contender roasted the golf course harder than the field. The year was 1970. Hazeltine National Golf Club was hosting its very first US Open, and not everyone was impressed. Enter Dave Hill, one of the top players that week, and absolutely not a fan of the layout. After shooting a solid 69 in the second round, reporters asked what he thought of the course, and Hill didn't hold back. He said Hazeltine lacked only 80 acres of corn and a few cows, like it was some half-finished farm rather than a major championship venue. The quote went viral, well, 1970s viral, and earned him a $150 fine from the USGA. But Hill wasn't done. He followed it up with, "Whoever designed this course had the blueprints upside down." The wild part? Despite all the noise, Hill finished runner-up, just behind Tony Jacklin. His game was strong, but his mouth was louder. And that week, his legendary one-liners overshadowed everything he did with a club in hand. Next, number 3. What started as a coronation turned into a collapse, and ended in one of the coldest finishes in US Open history. The final round of the 2024 US Open at Pinehurst, number 2, felt like Rory McIlroy's moment. 10 years without a major. Critics circling, pressure mounting. But there he was, leading by 2 shots with just 5 holes to go. He was playing smart, in control, steady, and then it started to slip. On the 15th, a short miss, bogey. On the 16th, another misread, another bogey. Suddenly, Bryson DeChambeau was back in it. And while Rory was unraveling, Bryson was grinding. Fairways, greens, pure focus. By the time they reached the 18th, it was all square. Rory left himself 4 feet to save par. And missed. Again. Then came Bryson. His ball in the sand, 55 yards out, needing par to win. And he delivered. A perfect bunker shot to 4 feet. One last putt. Dead center. Game over. Bryson DeChambeau wins the US Open for the second time. And Rory, another runner-up. Another major heartbreak. It was a duel, a collapse, a clutch finish, and one of the most gut-wrenching swings in momentum the US Open has ever seen. And here we are at the runner-up. This wasn't just impressive, it was historic. Winning one US Open is hard. Winning two? Nearly impossible. But winning back-to-back US Opens? That's something golf hadn't seen in nearly 30 years. And then came Brooks Koepka. In 2017, he bulldozed Aaron Hills with power and precision, finishing at 16 under par, tying the US Open scoring record. It was his first major, and he made it look easy. But anyone can get hot once, right? That's what people said until 2018, when Brooks stepped onto the tee at Shinnecock Hills, one of the nastiest, most unforgiving US Open setups in recent memory. The greens were slick. The course was borderline unplayable. The scores, sky high. But Brooks didn't blink. He battled through the chaos, outlasted a surging Tommy Fleetwood, and shot a clutch final round 68 to finish at +1. Good enough to win by a single stroke. That win didn't just silence the doubters. It put his name alongside legends. The first player since Curtis Strange in 1989 to go back-to-back at the US Open. And finally, last but not least, the big number one. And let me tell you, you can't script this stuff. It's 2008. Torrey Pines, Tiger Woods is limping, grimacing, wincing after nearly every swing. What no one fully knew at the time? He had a fractured tibia and a torn ACL. That's not a metaphor, that's an actual broken leg. And somehow, through the pain and the pressure, he kept himself in contention. Then came the 72nd hole. He needed a birdie on the par 5 18th to force a playoff with a Rocco Mediate. Under enormous pressure, he delivered one of the most clutch sequences of his career. A huge drive, a gutsy second shot, and a perfect putt to tie it up. But it wasn't over. The next day, they returned for an 18-hole playoff. Same situation. Tiger still limping, still hurting, and somehow still right there. By the end of the playoff, they were tied again. It went to sudden death. And on the 91st hole of the tournament, Tiger finally beat Rocco with a par to win his 14th major title. Looking back, it wasn't just a great win. It was one of the toughest and most unforgettable performances in the history of sports. He played with a broken leg and won the US Open. How do you even compete with that? Before you go, don't miss the next wild moment we've got lined up. It's right there in the center. Enjoy.